how many people have heard me talk about the urban service boundary over the past couple of years? I've done it a few times. All right, so we do have a lot of people that are new to this, and that's fantastic. I want to first thank you all for being here. I know that sometimes these conversations aren't the most thrilling, but I'll do my best to kind of pull us along on this. Really, when we're talking about an urban service area or what we use within our community to kind of plan out things in a more appropriate way, we're falling back to the goals, objectives, and policies that we as a community have established through our comprehensive plan. The urban service area, or the concept of the urban service area, really stems from conversations with our community about how we want to grow. And this forms what we pretty much produce within the Division of Planning, which is the land use element. How do we want to grow? How do we want to change over time to meet the needs of our community members for the next 20 years? Ultimately, whenever we're talking about long-range planning, it's not that far out. We're really just talking about the next 20 years so that we can vision out what our next generation really wants, what we want to see as we age in place, and how we can make our community more equitable across all of our community. The decisions to maintain or expand or modify our urban service area are really made by our Urban County Council and Planning Commission after hearing from members of our community, after we do our outreach for our comprehensive plans and move that forward. Recently, we went through and proposed some land use changes and modifications through our Urban Growth Management Master Plan. I'll get into that a little bit later on, but we've also changed the way that we think about urban service areas and how we go through the process of evaluating if we have enough land within our community to meet our needs. So what essentially is an urban service area? It's an area that we are allowed to have our urban land uses, our commercial, residential, and industrial land. It's also where we get those urban services, our sanitary sewers, street lights, trash pickup, sidewalks, all of those things are wrapped up within this area. And that's really meant to guide how we are spending our dollars, making sure that we're not leapfrogging and eating away at our agricultural land, and make sure that we are trying to do the best to develop a community that's cohesive and is trying to meet the needs of everyone. Here we have is an image of our first kind of conversation about what we were talking about within an urban service area. You can see kind of in that first area down here in the gray, that was our initial city layout. We were looking at what was the densest part of our community, how were we working, what was working, and then looking out from there, saying, oh, well, if we needed more land for residential development, we can start with our first ring, and then start looking at other areas. Start talking about what would be the best way to serve those areas with our public facilities. Goes into why do we need this? Really in the post-World War II period, we go through a period of extensive growth of our cities, of our smaller counties, things like that, in which we are seeing tons of investment not only into housing from the federal government, but a lot of investment that's going into our public infrastructure. Not only our roadways, which everybody really focuses in on because, frankly, before World War II, we were very agricultural. Even though we went through an industrial revolution in the United States, it was focused in those urban centers, not so much the smaller communities. We weren't seeing the booming of cities in the same kind of way that we see in the post-World War II period when we start seeing the suburbanization of America. We start to grow a little bit out. We're starting to see a lot more car usage. The car is now the primary vehicle that is moving people across our communities. It's no longer the horse or the streetcar or the bus. We're starting to go to the individualized perspective. And really, we get the shift in what we think of as being the American dream at this point in time. And that really drives what we do as a community, not only with zoning, but with planning in a lot of different ways. As time goes on, we're also starting, communities, we're starting to have this reaction of saying, we're growing and that's great, but we're also leapfrogging different properties. We're picking one farm, developing that, jumping over the next farm because it's either cheaper or they're willing to sell. And that gives us some real problems as a community because now we're extending our public services, our sanitary sewers, roadways, sidewalks, those types of things across farmscape. And that's not a great way to develop as a community. We aren't able to infill in a way that is cohesive, connects communities. We're starting to separate things out in a lot of different ways. And we're also costing our city extreme amounts of money. Extending services, facilities is very costly to a city. And that forced Lexington and a lot of other communities to say, well, what can we do to try to make sure we're doing this in the most orderly possible way? And that really is restricting that area of where development can go. That makes us really look at when are we going to connect roadways, how are we going to provide facilities, what is the best and most efficient way to provide those facilities, how are we getting open space and parks to people that need them, that are further out in our community so that they get to enjoy their community in the same kind of way. After a little bit of time, once we establish that urban service area, we also get to see some of the benefits that is caused outside of that area. We're preserving our agricultural land, creating a real tourist attraction. We're also separating those urban land uses from our rural land uses and our rural land uses from our urban land uses. Our industrial land right next to where we're trying to produce our food is not often the best way to situate urban planning. At the same time, situating a pig farm next to a residential development is equally a bad idea. So it gives us an opportunity to go ahead and have conversations about buffering requirements, about how we're going to integrate our rural with our urban and make sure both have a place to breathe. It is also pushing us to have that conversation of what's the opposite of the urban service area. That's our rural service area. It wasn't really until 1996 that we start talking about needing plans for our rural service area to promote not only the really important economic aspects of our rural community, but also to promote some of the tourist activities that are going on out there. So in our current landscape, and this has changed just a little bit in the past couple of years, approximately 90 square miles makes up our urban service area. That serves about 93% of our county's population. 195 acres or square miles, sorry, really promotes that agricultural production, that business side of our community, and it only covers about 7% of our population. The difference is in that 93%, they are getting their services provided in a more efficient, environmentally sustainable, and fiscally sustainable way. All of this kind of ties into a little bit of the history of Lexington. And Lexington's planning history is very progressive. It's really important to a lot of the changes that were made throughout the United States. We established our first planning commission in 1928. We had our first comprehensive plan in 1931. That's only a couple of years off the heels of Cincinnati, who established the first comprehensive plan in 1928. So we're really kind of sticking with what's going on in the United States. In 1952, the fiscal court gives the Planning Commission the authority to zone all of Fayette County. At that time, we were not a merged urban county government. In 1958, we established that first urban service area for our nation. This is really important in establishing what will be the growth of Lexington over time. And the maintenance of that is really important as well, because in 1958, the establishment of the urban service area was not a legal establishment, it was a policy establishment. It was something that we said within our comprehensive plan that this is important. Our community members have told us that this urban service area, orderly development, is really important to us. So we need to put this into our land use element of our comprehensive plan, and we need to keep that going. In 2013, we make another major shift within planning, and we go away from what is considered a land use map within our comprehensive plan. Essentially, This was the map that told you, this is what you should be doing on your property. We shifted away from that and started to have conversations about, okay, well, what's the context of that property? What's the important thing that we should be saying is going on around this? How are we meeting the needs of our community from a residential perspective? Ultimately, this allows for greater infill and redevelopment in our community rather than kind of rigid standards of saying, I see that there is green on that map, so it has to be that land use. Or I see there's red on that map, so we need to have a commercial use on that property. Instead, we now start to have conversations between our community to say, well, what's happening around there? What are our goals, objectives, and policies that are laid out in our comprehensive plan? And how are we achieving that with a rezoning of a property or a new development on that property? And then most recently, at the beginning of this year, we went that next step and we legally established our urban service area. So now, when it was previously just established as part of the comprehensive plan, we've put this into ordinance. This is an important aspect of us saying, we find this to be very important. We do acknowledge the idea that we need to look at this periodically, but we find that this needs to be part of law, not just policy. And I'm going to talk about a little bit how we got there and the process by way that kind of changes over time. But this is a really important change for our community. Many other communities throughout the United States that have established an urban service area or an urban service growth boundary have already had this for decades because they've said, if we just do this by policy every single time, it's all too often left in the hands of making a decision at a knee-jerk reaction without data to underlie how we are going to do something. So now that we have established a policy, and we'll look at that in a second, it is based off of a rational perspective of things. And there's a process that we go through that we try to make sure that we're doing this in the most responsible way possible. So this is the graphic that we put in almost everything, and if it was a PowerPoint, it would have cycled through everything, but this is a great view of what it was, our urban service area in 1958. It has now extended out, and I'll use the little laser to come out around these areas, and I have another graphic that'll show it. But we have grown, contracted, modified some areas here and there, but ultimately we have gotten to the point in which we needed to have an established policy or program that is in law that guides how we go through the process of reviewing change, and that is Lexington's Preservation and Growth Management Program. This was established by ordinance just earlier this year. The ordinance is incredibly dry. This little graphic is fantastic in comparison. So we'll jump into it a little bit more, but it really falls into 5 sections, 2 different kind of policy directions that led us to this program. The first is we need to get this off of the comprehensive plan, allow it to breathe a little bit. So every 5 years, the year after we adopt a comprehensive plan, the community will now do what's called a growth trends report. This will look at specific data that is coming out of trusted sources, or at least official sources for a lot of people. That's the U.S. Census, the state Kentucky Data Center. We're pulling directly from our Acela logs or our citizen portal. That's all of our building permits, our zone change applications, our plat recordings, all of those things that go into what we do on a daily level in the Division of Planning and the Division of Building Inspection. That will give us an idea of what is our residential needs. So looking at future population growth, taking into account how much vacant land that we have within our community, and then looking at how much property or how much dwelling units, how many dwelling units are being developed per acre over a period of time. That will give us a projection of how much land we currently have to meet our residential need. I'll say that a lot of our conversation when we were establishing this program was, should we do residential and commercial at the same time? What we found was commercial development is a really leaky bucket. As much of our perspective of we say, well, we need this amount of commercial land, what happens is residential outpaces that need. We all too often see residential come first, and then business comes second. All the developers talk about, well, are there enough rooftops? That's their go-to position. And if there are enough rooftops, they'll start including a fair amount of commercial. Now, there's some other things in there that are a little bit more complicated, but we still need to make available land for commercial in neighborhoods, or we just create the same kind of issue that we've had in the past, in which people need to hop in their cars, drive across town to go to the grocery store, hop back in the car and go home. That really is why we went ahead and did a whole bunch of regulation changes before this. I can talk about those later on. I don't want to drone too much on the ZOTAs or the zoning ordinance text amendments, those regulating changes at this point, but feel free to jump in with questions later on. So once we establish this kind of growth trend, if there is a residential need, then it would go on and present to the council. They would have some options, but if there's no residential need, the report still goes on to the council. And that's really because we still need to have that conversation of, are we utilizing our land to the best way capable? Or do we need to make some changes? Do we need to make policy, regulatory, or funding decisions that would make housing a little bit more available within our community, that would allow us to utilize the land that we currently have in a better way? If there is a need that is identified, that's the only thing that opens the door to a conversation of, we need to modify our urban service area. It would necessitate us looking at the policies, regulation changes, things like that first. And then if the council identifies that there is a need, that we need to go ahead and add extra land to our urban service area, that is when that would occur. So now that if there is that need, it would continue on, and now we get into the things that we kind of know a little bit more about. So we would be looking at the vacant land that we currently have, and we'd have a discussion of, why aren't people developing in our community? Why aren't the properties along the edges of Lexington developing in the same way that we would like the properties inside the core to infill and redevelop? Why are there large swaths of agricultural land still within our urban service area? We can go and talk to those developers. If they come in and they say, look, we just never want to develop, that is okay. It is their property. And that has long been kind of an issue with how we've expanded in the past, is that we didn't really have conversation with landowners to say, do you really want to be in the urban service area? This most recent expansion that we did in 2024 was the first time we had a lot of those conversations with a lot of people. We just said, okay, well, this is sewerable, we'll go that way. Or this connects to some roadways, we can go that way. That's not the best way to do it, because then we end up sitting on land for 20, 30, 75 years. And we do have many properties within our urban service area that are zoned agricultural from 1958. So we do have some things that we have been updating, a lot of communication that we're working on in planning, and trying to make things work a little bit better. So if we went ahead and looked at all that vacant land, we'd come back, and then we just start to move on to the next process. And that gets into, we go through a land review with wanting applicants. Again, going out to people to say, do you want to develop your property? Is it appropriately located? Can we sewer it? Can we do all these other things that are necessary and don't cost us an arm and a leg? And then how does that fit into the Planning Commission's goals, objectives, policies that are laid out in our comprehensive plan? Finally, we get into our master planning process, which is what we do every single time. We currently have 3 going on. Shameless plug, if you're not tied into the downtown master plan, the Blue Sky Small Area Plan, or the Winchester Road Corridor Study, which is about to start up, you should. We would like your involvement. We'd like to hear from everybody about those projects so that your voice is laid out in there, so that we're making sure that we're getting the type of development and rezonings and changes to our built infrastructure that members of our community want. There is one other element of this, which is the special economic development need. There was a lot of conversation during this process about, well, what about industrial land, jobs land, things like that. and it did not work to fit it into the residential need. Again, talking about that leaky bucket. So in a way to ensure that we were not going to get a broken program, we needed to allow for some sort of expansion or conversation about economic development need. And really what would happen is, with this portion of the program, if there was a transformative economic project that was brought to the mayor or to the urban county council, they could put it forth for a vote to review whether or not it should be we should expand our urban service area to allow for that to occur. Now, ultimately, this would also require a supermajority vote by the urban county council, so 10 out of the 15 members would have to vote in the affirmative. And it would have to come with a lot of extra information that shows that this is a transformative project. Many public hearings, a lot of conversation with the public, making sure that everybody knows why or if this should be done. So in kind of summation of that program, there are some really important benefits. The first thing, and the thing that as the manager of long-range planning, I'm very happy with, is that we're starting to separate the conversation with the comprehensive plan and our urban service area. By making it law, by making it procedural, by making it data-driven, that is a much better way to talk about the urban service area than during a policy conversation with our comprehensive plan. This will allow our comprehensive plan to breathe a lot more. And that really gets into elements of our comprehensive plan like infrastructure. We should be focusing on the infrastructure that we need within our urban service area and making sure that we're upgrading it for all of our community members and investing in our community. For the first time in 2018, we talked about climate change within our community. For the first time in 2018 and 2023, we had a robust conversation about equity and making sure that our community is growing for everyone's needs, not just a few. And making sure that we are also talking about other things like policy development that could lead to changes in our urban service area that allow us to use our land fiscally, socially, and environmentally responsible and sustainable going forward. It also codifies a long-standing practice of looking at our urban service area when we grow. The last time we grew was in 1996. Not one person in our department or division of planning was working in our division of planning in 1996. I'll also say the records of how they went about that process were a little hard to go through. Both myself and the deputy director of planning were in on weekends, reading old notes, trying to figure out how they were having these conversations, what we were missing, what were the types of documents that we needed to provide that were at least substantially similar to 1996 or exceeding the information that they had. We didn't want to reinvent that wheel every single time going forward. It also creates that transparent, data-driven process. If anybody has a chance, go ahead and visit Imagine Lexington's Analytic Research Center. This is where we are posting all of the data from our community that we're consolidating from different data sources, like the census, like the BLS or something like that, but also creating new metrics, showing how many dwelling units were constructed in 2025, how many were permitted, how many are just still sitting there waiting to be developed and provide someone with a new home or a new apartment or something like that. So this is going to be a pretty transformative website for us. We're also going to get into the data a little bit more so that we can have conversations about how our community is growing in between our comprehensive plans and in between our growth trends reports. And then finally, it provides for a review by all levels of decision makers in our community that look at land use, specifically the Planning Commission and the Urban County Council. We need to make sure that we're having these conversations, it's a reflexive conversation, and that when we finish a comprehensive plan and we put policies out there, we can then put them into the growth trends report, get it in front of the people that make the decisions about the laws and policies that we have that are in the Urban County Council. So one of the things that, and I've got a little bit more time, right? All right. One of the things that I wanted to highlight, I've done this presentation a fair amount, and I know that a few people in this room have heard me do this presentation, but I wanted to talk about a little bit of the talking points that we see with the urban service area. There is a lot of anti-urban service area rhetoric out there, good and bad. I know that the federal government is actually looking at urban service areas as not being a great thing. And I just want to highlight just a few things in here that are just not true. So fact or fiction, housing is more expensive because of an urban service area. Anybody? It's a bit of both. This is a cheat. It's both fact and fiction. And that really falls into one thing. With the fact side of thing, we do have a limited supply, so that leads to less competition and ultimately leads to a little less opportunity. Now, I'll point out, this is area, and it's a little darker than I've got it on my screen. This is area 3 right here of our most recent expansion. There are a total of 5 property owners there. And whenever we do an expansion or whenever we talk about growth in our community, what happens is those 5 property owners already have options on their property by somebody else. So if we don't have that internal competition, it does limit some of our opportunities. However, I do want to stress that that is not what is causing the growth of prices of housing in our community. Right now, if you look at this bottom kind of graph in the corner, that is an indication from the National Home Builders Association about the rising costs of housing. In that orange area, the one that is dramatically shooting up since 1998, that's the cost of construction. That doesn't include the cost of the land value underneath. It doesn't include the infrastructure in there. That is the cost of building a home. Nationally, we are going from, in 1998, it was about 130 some thousand. And now we are reaching into close to 450,000 for the construction of a new single-family detached home. That is really also playing into the fact that the current first-time home buyer average age is about 40 years old, and which is wild to think about, that it takes you typically most of your life to get to the point in which you can purchase a home. That's not something that we really want to promote in our community, that means that we have to go further and look at other solutions to provide housing. The other aspect of that is that the amount of funding that has gone into capital projects, that means our roadways, for new roadways, new sewer projects, new water projects, that funding is starting to decrease. But the thing that continues to go up when it comes to the funding of infrastructure is operation and maintenance. And operation and maintenance typically falls to your local government. So when we talk about the expenses that we have as a local government, when we talk about expansion of urban services, things like that, that number will continue to go up. And the ability to fund that from outside sources, to subsidize that, which those subsidies were a lot more available when we saw the housing boom from the 1950s all the way through the 1970s, those are falling out. So what happens is, when local government can't fund those capital projects, we rely on developers to build those capital projects, and that furthers the increase in the cost of a single-family home. Just from our analysis with Partners for Economic Solution for our most recent expansion of our urban service area, it's going to cost a lot to pay for the infrastructure for our expansion areas. That's not a bad thing, though. I do want to stress, when we talk about needing to provide housing, when we talk about needing to provide housing for our community, if we can't find or fit that need or fill that need with the land that we have, we as a community do need to have a conversation about how are we going to allow for people to live here, everyone to live here. And I want to stress that, because that goes into a conversation about affordable housing, attainable housing for the first-time home buyer that is not 40 years of age, but is closer to 25. And that pushes us to what are we doing as a community? What are the things that we are pushing for? Before we adopted the Urban Growth Master Plan, we did what is called the Urban Growth Zoning Ordinance, or Urban Growth Management Zoning Ordinance Text Amendment. We went ahead and we changed the rules. We went ahead and said, if we are going to develop our community in a walkable landscape that has mixed use, that allows people to age in place in their community, to grow up and down with their housing options, we need to, one, right size how we are looking at our zoning. We need to allow for different beneficial opportunities, whether that is affordable housing, townhome development, mixed use development. And then when we expand, we need to provide the density that will support the infrastructure and the operation and maintenance of that long into the future. And that goes into what are we looking at for our density numbers that are coming out of our urban growth master plan. If we did this the same way that we did it in 1996, one, it'd be too expensive for the vast majority of people to buy a house or rent a house or live in that community, and we would not be able to pay for it long into the future. Yep, I keep pointing at the screen. Another fact or fiction, urban service areas make affordable housing impossible. I think what most people hear is, oh, you can never build affordable housing there. You can't do it, it's too expensive, you can't do it. That's a fiction. Lexington, and affordable housing is not just a development issue. It is a community issue. We as a community need to decide where we want to provide housing, where we want to provide funding, where we want to provide opportunity for individuals to rent at affordable housing level, and then to buy at an affordable level. And Lexington has done a very good job. We've put a lot of money towards this since 2014, but we are behind. Much of the numbers that everybody is probably hearing around when it comes to the housing that we're missing right now, whether it's the 30,000 housing units or the 22,000 that are coming out of the report, about 80% of that is supposed to be affordable housing. So we're not looking at the market rate developers to fill that gap. What we are looking at is how we as a community can allow for affordable housing providers to go ahead and meet that need, either by providing, and we had a lot of conversation with the affordable housing providers over the past couple of years. They said, you either need to help us out with money or you need to help us out with land. And we as a planning staff said, well, we can't do anything. We can't do anything with money. That's the council, that's our community. That is something that we as a community need to say, this is what we want. But as a planning staff, we can make a recommendation on a policy that was ultimately adopted into law to say, we can provide more land for affordable housing options. Essentially, we have established what's called an affordable housing or a workforce housing density bonus that allows for individuals or developers, primarily that do the affordable housing development, to utilize the land that we currently have at a greater density. So looking at the zoning of the property, if it's a certain zone, they get to go to the next zone up to provide a denser housing product. There's a lot baked into this slide, so I can talk about it if anybody has questions, but I will say we had our first application of this about 2 weeks ago. We had a meeting just this morning on this, and we have 5 or 6 other projects that are coming in. These aren't the big affordable housing providers that are coming and talking to us. These are small developers that are just starting out, that are taking advantage of the monies that are being allocated out there, and taking advantage of all of the infill and redevelopment lots that we have in our community. There are a fair amount of vacant lots, but previously they were not buildable at an affordable level because you couldn't offset those costs of the underlying land and the cost of construction to build something that would meet the needs of someone making 80% of the area median income or even 120% of our area median income. So a lot of this goes into, and I'm going to make a pitch, over the next couple of years, we're going to be talking about our comprehensive plan again. A lot of that is going to be a conversation no longer just about our urban service area, but what we want to see from our community going forward for the next 20 years. And I would really push you to involve yourself in that process, make your voice heard, and also make your voice heard at all of our small area plans, master plans, and corridor studies, because that is what leads to regulation change, priority change, and can really influence how we look as a community in the next 20 years. Be happy to answer any questions or talk. I think I came close to my time. All right, there we go. That's something that we want to look at. One of the things that it probably fall into vacant, and we have very strict guidelines into what is vacant within our community. We do want to kind of avoid any conversation about underutilization, largely because planning has a horrible background of urban renewal, in which we basically pointed at a lot of low density, primarily black neighborhoods and said that's underutilized, it's blighted, we need to redo it. I think if we go into that, we're going to have to change our regulations to say, let's say surface parking lots. I think that's a great one that we kind of hear from. In surface parking lots in downtown areas, that's not the best land use. We want to see built structures. That's a better economic driver. That's a safer operation that builds a greater kind of cohesiveness rather than the jagged teeth of parking lots being or surface parking lots being every little bit. But we would have to change those regulations to then talk about that as being more vacant or something that is underutilized in that way. Unfortunately not. With all planning activities, when it comes to zoning or vacant land, we do not have the ability to tell the state what to do. We do have the opportunity to kind of influence transy through zoning and land use restrictions, but with the sovereign immunity of the state and the university, we can't really tell them what to do. Right now, we've seen the two applications that I've gotten to be part of, and we're hoping to see more. One has been a multifamily, going from our planned neighborhood residential or R3 zone. They're trying to go up just a little bit more so that they can meet that economic side of things, meet their gap funding, and add a couple of more units out on a property. The other one is looking at townhomes. So the great thing about the townhomes example is they would have to subdivide. And that means that even if the property owner at some point in time wants to keep it for rental, they can keep it, or they can go ahead and sell it off as an affordable product. We wanted to make sure with the affordable housing and workforce housing density bonus, we were targeting people that wanted to rent, people wanted to own, all of that kind of stuff, so that if there are more opportunities to own, specifically with townhomes or condos, that's probably going to be your first-time home buyer option. The small lot, single-family, detached structure is not really the first-time home buyer option anymore, especially not in a urban locality like Lexington.